Mae'Govannen. Today we're going to begin a new series called the Silmarillion. We're going to go ahead and take that book one chapter at a time. In each edition, we will go ahead and talk about that chapter. One of the big differences that I'm hoping to accomplish with this series is that it may be different from others on the YouTube and on the net, is we're going to go ahead and take each chapter one at a time per video and discuss it from an elven point of view. Not just from a mortal or man view or from any other view. These are going to be discussed from an elven point of view. So I invite, as always, anyone out there who is watching to please express your opinions in the comment section to let me know how you feel, what I may have missed, what would be great to talk about in the future. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this. So today is going to be chapter 1, which is Ainur, which is my favorite chapter of the whole book. It's literally called, it translates into the music of the Ainur. All right, but before we get into that, I just wanted to kind of give a reminder. In the next few days, I'm going to be giving a very controversial episode. A lot of people have been asking for it. It is near and dear to my heart, and it is about the elven diet. At least from my interpretation, what is the elven diet? Many of you might agree, many of you might disagree. I will try to give some Tolkien perspective on it, as well as elven perspectives outside of the Tolkien viewpoint. All right, so that will be in the next few days. I should be coming out with that one. So again, I invite discussion, but let's let it be discussion. Let's let it be debate. We can all learn from each other. All right, let's keep emotions in a gentle way, and let's talk about it. It might be a very fun subject to go over, and maybe we can all learn from each other. And next week, I'm going to be doing most likely another chapter on the Silmarillion series, and it will be on the ValaQuenta, or the history of the Valar. So that'll be next week. But today, we're going to be talking about the Ainur. All right, the music of the Ainur. Part of the reason I decided to go ahead and do a series on the Silmarillion, it was actually my wife, Peggy, who brought it up, that it is, for many people, I've heard that it is a rather complex book to get into. It's one thing to read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, but the Silmarillion is a much more complex book. For many, myself included, it would be considered an elven Bible. It is the Genesis story. It is a creation story. It's a story of how everything came to be from the beginning, from before the universe and up to around the fourth era, the fourth age, right up to Lord of the Rings. So it covers, in essence, billions of years. And it is, for many, like I said, a complicated read. I would like to go ahead and try to simplify it, but again, discuss it from an elven point of view. So let's see where we go. Even though this video I'm about to show you a clip from, it is not one of mine, but it is probably, in my view, from a nice condensed way of looking at it, the best video I've ever seen done on the Ainur, and it was by Willow Productions. I'm going to be leaving a link to them for the full video in the description below, and please take a look at it. I love watching it just as an inspiration. It is a high production value, great graphics they were done. I thought it was a great synopsis of this one chapter. All right, and they've done a few others in this area, but they're a great production company, not just Lord of the Rings or Elven, but I guess I would assume that this touched someone's heart there, and they wanted to see if they could do a video on it. So I'm going to take a minute out here and let you watch this, and then this is just a short clip of it, and then I'll be right back.
There was Eru, the One, who in Ardor is called Ilúvatar. And he made first the Ainur, the Holy Ones, that were the offspring of his thought. And they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music. And they sang before him, and he was glad.
Pretty good, isn't it? Even just that short little clip. So I invite you to go and take a look at the full. I think it's about 6 minutes for the full video. And I'll be showing another tiny little clip of it at the end of this video as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the Silmarillion. What is it? And then we're going to talk about Ainur. Okay, the Silmarillion is, again, for most, many, an Elven Bible. It is full of creationism, full of the stories, full of Eru. You're going to be introduced to a multitude of different characters as we go through, individuals who were described in the book itself. In the first book, we're going to hear about, in the first chapter, we're going to hear about Eru. And Eru is another word for God. It means the one. All right, so you're going to be hearing about Eru. You're going to be hearing about Manwe and Aule, Morgoth. We're going to be hearing about a lot of different individuals, and we'll go through those in detail. But let's talk about this from an Elven point of view. This is very different than maybe a lot of others. Where does the literature, the knowledge from the Silmarillion and Ainur, where does it come from? All right, and we know that Tolkien wrote it, but there are many of us that believe that Tolkien was inspired to write this. As I said before, in a letter that Tolkien wrote, someone asked him, do you really believe that you wrote this? And he came back and said, no, I don't. This was inspired. This was divine in one level or another, is how we tend to look at it. All right, well, according to Tolkien, the story was actually passed down because of mainly one individual, one human, one mortal, and his name was Ariel. And Ariel, his other name was Elfine, which means elf friend. He was one of those rare ones that made it through all the magic and the illusion and was able to actually get to Tal Aresia, which is the Lonely Isle right outside of Ainur, which is, all of this is protected from mortals. And it is where the elves can go. It's home, where they don't have to deal with the mortal wars and torments any longer. And he actually made it through. He was a sailor, a mariner, and he made it through, and he landed on Tal Aresia and met the elves that live there to this day. And he asked them for an understanding of the history of it. And in part, some of this was done by one of the most famous Elven lore masters of all, and that was Penngolad. Penngolad of Gondolin was his name, Penngolad. And the theory is he's still there and still alive today, considered one of the great Elven lore masters. He was part of a group of lore masters that included him and Fëanor and Rumiel, who made the first writing of all, to put it down to where you could actually write outside of just being runes. He created the first alphabet, and then Fëanor came in and changed it, updated it, so to speak. Well, Penngolad came in after Rumiel and added to the history, added to the stories and legends. And so Ariel came to the island, and he met the elves there, and Penngolad chose to teach him their history. Before then, humans knew very little about Valinor or about Eru or about the Maiar or Valar. They knew very little about it, or I should say they had already forgotten most of it from thousands of years hence. And so then Ariel then was able to come back, and that's where we get the Silmarillion, okay, and the stories and so forth there. Okay, so Penngolad, he was an interesting person, an interesting elf. The writing goes, Penngolad was an elf born in Neverest to a Nodorian lord and a Sindarin lady, when Turgon built his hidden city in Tumladen, and he moved with his people there. Okay, he was a member of the group called the Lambergormelr, which were a very elite group of Elven scholars or lore masters back during the First Age. And he was known as the Sage of the Nodor, okay, and was counted as the greatest of all the lore masters since Fëanor or Rumiel. All right, well, when the city was finally destroyed. He was able to escape with it, and fortunately, eventually he made his way to Toladarcia, where he is to this day, and now we have access to the information that we do. All right, so he survived. We now have the stories. And one thing I want to get into before I go a little bit further into this, and this comes from a letter from Tolkien, and he actually wrote this to a Milton Waldman back in 1951. And the story is full, in some ways you might say, of magic. Okay, but what was magic? Okay, is it what we see on TV, in the Harry Potter shows or things of that nature? It might be, but not from an elven perspective. If you'll remember when Frodo was talking to Galadriel about magic, and she was going, well, I'm not really quite sure what you mean. You seem to be connecting ours with magic, which is also connected with the evil ones as well, and they're not the same thing. Okay, because the whole universe, you might say, was created from magic. But how did Tolkien define magic? This is really very cool. All right, so in his letter in 1951 to Milton Waldman, this is what he wrote. He said, I have not used magic consistently, and indeed the Elven Queen Galadriel is obliged to remonstrate with the hobbits on their confused use of the word, both for the devices and operations of the enemy and for those of the elves. So the hobbits kind of thought magic's magic. And Galadriel was saying, no, magic is not magic. I have not, because there is not a word for the latter, for elven magic, since all human stories have suffered the same confusion. But the elves are there in my tales to demonstrate the difference. Their magic is art, delivered from many of its human limitations, more effortless, more quick, more complete, the product in the vision and unflawed correspondence. And its object is art, not power, subcreation, not domination, and tyrannous reforming of creation. So what Tolkien was trying to say is that for elves, magic is an art form. It's to help subcreate or co-create. It's not for power. It's not for domination. It's not to mutilate creation, but to co-create with it. A beautiful saying I learned many years ago, because quite a number of years ago I wrote a book of healing based on Edgar Cayce. Okay, and I think I discussed a little bit about that in an early video. But I don't know if I said this. One of the most beautiful things I ever read about in the Edgar Cayce readings was someone asked him, what is the point to life? What is the meaning of life? That was the big question. Of course, people have been arguing and warring over it for thousands of years. And Edgar Cayce had the most simple, the most beautiful description I've ever had. He said that the meaning of life is simply that God, as he put it, okay, Eru for us, but he said God simply wanted companionship. God wanted someone to co-create with him the universe. And so that's where elves come from. The Eru wanted to give an opportunity to others to co-create with him. And one of the things that we've noticed from Tolkien is that elves are unique from all other races, that we are even unique from the Valar and the Maiar, that we have a certain kind of freedom on this world within Arda. Excuse me, the freedom to co-create, to create with God. And that's what we're able to do here. Okay, so we are co-creators, and we use magic, but we use it as an art form. All right, so let's go ahead and let's start Ainur Lindali ourselves. Okay, it literally starts off with, there was Eru, the one, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar. Ilúvatar means the father of all. Okay, and he made first the Ainur, the holy ones. A lot of people would actually call them the angels, but they were the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music. All right, and they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while, they sang alone, but few together, while the rest hearkened, for each comprehended only that part of the mind of Ilúvatar from which he came. And in the understanding of their brethren, they grew but slowly, yet ever as they listened, They came to a deeper understanding and increased in unison and harmony. So again, art, the universe was created with music. All right, the music of the universe. We'll get into that a little bit deeper here in just a minute. But if music is art, okay, is a form of art, and magic is art, all right, and what we basically have is that the universe is a creation of art. All of the universe, Ea, everything that exists is actually a creation of art. We live in a painting. We live in a musical theme. I mean, what a beautiful thing to realize that everything is art to us. All right, and it came to pass that Ilúvatar called all of the Ainur and declared to them a mighty theme. There were 3 themes, and this was the first. A mighty theme, unfolding to them greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed, and the glory of its beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur, so that they bowed before Ilúvatar and were silent. So, in Ilúvatar's mind, he wanted to create a universe of art, of music. And so he propounded unto those before him his original children, the Ainur, the original creations of his thought, and said, here is my great theme. This is what I want for the universe. Then Ilúvatar said to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with the flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices if he will. But I will sit and hearken, and be glad that through you great beauty has awakened into song. What a great thing that not only does Ilúvatar want to create the universe out of music, out of art, he also allowed each individual of his creation the freedom of expression to be allowed to do something unique in by their thoughts. All right. Then the voices of the Ainur, like unto harps and lutes and pipes and trumpets and viols and organs, and like unto countless choirs, singing with words, began to fashion the theme of Ilúvatar to a great music. And a sound arose of endless interchanging melodies, woven in harmony that passed beyond hearing into the depths and into the heights. And the places of the dwelling of Ilúvatar were filled to overflowing, and the music and the echo of the music went out into the void, and it was no longer void. What was void was now filled with music, was filled with the very thoughts of the Ainur, singing and playing music based on what Ilúvatar had presented to them, and they let their energies of creation go forth. All right, so that was the first thing. Okay, while this was going on, they're all singing, they're all giving their perspective into the music. And along comes the Morgoth. I don't use the name that was used in the Silmarillion because in general elves at that time, and I tend to agree, will not use his original name any longer because he has forsaken it. And so he was renamed by the elves, the Morgoth. All right. So he came along, and he was actually, you will notice a very similar distinction or similarity between this creation story and that of Christianity, where the original, the Old Testament, where there was Satan, there was Lucifer, and Lucifer was at the time considered the greatest of all the angels. Well, from Tolkien's perspective of the creation story, the Morgoth was the most powerful of all the Ainur. He knew something of each one of them, so he had a part in every one of their knowledge, along with his as well. And again, Eru gave us all of them as well, free will. So the Morgoth, they're all singing and they're all creating this new music. Well, it came into his head that he wanted to really impose his own view instead of glorifying the view of Eru. And he wanted to create things out of his own mind, not, again, out of glorifying the light. And so he began to sing in disharmony with the others. And this started causing an uproar because those Ainur that were closest to him started getting confused, and they started slowly syncing up with him. And so after a short while, this became a very noisy place. You had one theme that was beautiful and flowing, and then you had this other one that was so repetitious and disharmonious. All right. And this was going on, and it was getting quite loud and out of harmony. Then Ilúvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that he smiled. And he lifted up his left hand, and a new theme began amid the storm, yet like and yet unlike to the former theme, and it gathered power and had a new beauty. So this is the second theme. Okay, so this one was totally unique from the first theme. Okay, but the discord of the Morgoth rose in uproar and contended with it. And again, there was a war of sound, more violent than before, until many of the Ainur were dismayed and sang no longer, and the Morgoth had the majesty. Then again, Ilúvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that his countenance was stern. And he lifted up his right hand, and behold, a third theme grew amid the confusion, and it was unlike the others, for it seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling of gentle sounds and delicate melodies. And it could not be quenched, and it took to itself power and profundity. And it seemed at last that there were two musics progressing at one time before the seat of Ilúvatar, and they were utterly at variance. The one was deep and wide and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow, from which its beauty chiefly came. The other had now achieved a unity of its own, and it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated, and it had little harmony, but rather a clamorous unison as of many trumpets all braying upon a few notes. And so it was very disharmonious. I know a few of us have heard these kind of songs before. All right, and it did its best to try to drown out the other song, the gentle song, the deep one, the wise song. In the midst of this strife, whereat the halls of Ilúvatar shook, and a tremor ran out into the silences, yet unmoved, Ilúvatar arose a third time, and his face was terrible to behold. Then he raised up both his hands, and in one chord, deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, piercing as the light of Ilúvatar, the music ceased. All music, all of it ceased. Then Ilúvatar spoke, and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is the Morgoth. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Ilúvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what you have done, and thou, Morgoth, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me. All right, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself had not imagined." At this point, the Ainur were pretty afraid. Were very concerned. Here you've also got Ilúvatar, who's extremely strict with them, countenance that is terrible to look upon. And he was trying to make an impression going, all right, you think that you had the mastery, Morgoth, but you did not. That whatever you do in the end will be part of me, and you will not be able to change the music no matter how much you may try to do it. All right. So then he said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and take you, and I'm going to show you what you created. Because while Ilúvatar gave the themes, the Ainur gave substance to it, helped create that. And so he said, now I'm going to let you see what you've done. And so he led them out from the void, and he led them to where the vision was being manifested, so to speak. Okay, but when they were come into the void, Ilúvatar said to them, "Behold your music." And he showed to them a vision, giving to them sight where before was only hearing. And they saw a new world, made visible before them, and it was globed amid the void, and yet it was sustained therein, but naught was of it. And as they looked and wondered, this world began to unfold its history, and it seemed to them that it lived and grew, And when the Ainur had gazed for a while and were silent, Ilúvatar said again, "Behold your music. This is your minstrelsy, and each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I set before you, the themes, all those things that it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Morgoth, wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." So what he was letting them know was that here is what you created, and each one of you in your own way have a part in it, and you will find within its history your songs that you included. And he told Morgoth, you think you had the mastery, you think you controlled the vision, but you did not. And so part of what you put in there will be there, but in the end, it will be to the glory of me, Ilúvatar. All right, so there was the vision in front of them. They were watching it, and according to the Silmarillion, they watched as the years, kind of like a video playing before them. They watched as the world grew and changed. All right, and then in a flash, the vision was gone. And according to the lore, just up to prior to the fourth age is when it ended, the vision ended. It never did go throughout the whole history. So it is known to this day that while the Ainur may know much about the world and much about its history and have some idea about the future, even they have no clear understanding about what will happen in the centuries and the eons come, because they were not shown everything. Ilúvatar always keeps something to himself. And it is said that in each new age of the world, something new comes in that was unforeseen even to the Valar. So we're always surprised about them as the years go by. So even the Valar don't have a clear understanding of just how all this story will play out, how this song will play out. Okay, so here they are. They're seeing the vision taken away, and in a flash, they understood something they had never understood before, and that was darkness. Because here they were, they saw this vision, and all of a sudden it was taken away, and all of a sudden they saw something that they had never really thought about before. Emptiness, darkness, where there was something, now there isn't. And they fell in love. They fell in love with the whole concept of Arda, because in the vision that they learned, that Arda in and of itself, which is the world, which is actually the solar system, and Inbar, which is Earth itself, it has beauty and it has meaning just unto itself. If we had never existed, this would still exist and would have meaning. But part of the story in which the Ainur watched was that it one day would be the birthplace and the place where we would reside, the children of Ilúvatar. And it goes on, it says, the children of Ilúvatar are elves and men, the firstborn and the followers. Now you probably, if you saw my previous video on Elven evolution, I make the argument that elves and men are the same. Some people interpret that phrase as the firstborn and the followers as there are elves and there are men. Okay, my argument says that we are the same, but that the men, basically as elves a long time ago, diverted from the path, did not follow Orome, and we'll learn more about that as we follow the Silmarillion. They did not follow to Valinor. They were separated from their kin, and so they later followed the elves on the same westward track. Again, if you're interested, watch my video on Elven evolution, and that will probably help clear up a little bit there for you. All right, so they knew that this was to be the eventual habitation for the children of Ilúvatar, us. And there were many amongst them that absolutely fell in love with the vision. And some of them, some of the most noble and wise and beautiful of them all, wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to go down to go there. All right, so, but when the Ainur had beheld this habitation in a vision and had seen the children of Ilúvatar arise therein, then many of the most mighty among them bent all of their thought and their desire towards that place. And of those, Morgoth was the chief, even as he was in the beginning the greatest of the Ainur, who took part in the music, and he feigned, even to himself at first, that he desired to go thither and order all things for the good of the children of Iluvatar, controlling the turmoils of the heat and the cold that had come to pass through him. So a group of the Ainur wanted to be a part of this vision, wanted to go help create this, to bring it into manifestation. And even the Morgoth in the beginning even fooled himself, thinking, yeah, I want to go there and I want to fix some of the things that I had caused, some of the damages, the extreme colds, the extreme heats, and so forth. All right. But it said, but he desired rather to subdue to his will both elves and men, envying the gifts with which Iluvatar promised to endow them. Remember, the freedom to co-create. And he wished them himself to have subjects and servants, and to be called Lord, and to be a master over other wills. But the other Ainur looked upon his habitation set within the vast spaces of the void, or the world, which the elves call Arda, the earth, and their hearts rejoiced in light, and their eyes, beholding many colors, were filled with gladness. So Iluvatar said, yes, if you want to, you can go and you can create, manifest the music into reality. But if you do, if you go down there, you are bound to the world and you cannot leave for as long as the world exists. And it is said by Tolkien that this was really a gentle and loving thing, because for them to be able to accomplish what they needed, they had to be part of the world had to be part of them. They had to be completely invested in this creation of art. So a number of them chose to go down, and they ended up going down into the world because it was getting ready to be created. And so in order to do that, Iluvatar said, all right, let's go ahead and let's this manifest. And he beheld the void and said, Ea! And with that word, the cord went out into the universe, and all of a sudden, where there was void, there was now a world globed in light and diffuse in its early form. And the Valar, the Ainur who chose to go, went down into the world knowing that they would be there for the rest of the time that the world would exist. All right, and those that went as a part of the Ainur, they are now called the Valar, which means the powers of the world. They are part of the world is part of them, and they will be here for the rest of the Earth's time that it exists. But they were quite dismayed when they first got here. They saw this beautiful vision of this growing, flowering world. But when they got there, the world was almost without form. It was in its early stages. Those who like to study astronomy, this will make total sense to you. It was just a ball of molten rock and gas and fire, and it was at its early stages. And at first they were dismayed, realizing, oh, we have to bring this up into manifestation. We have to create this from the very beginning. And so that's what they did. They got in there and they started working with it, and each of the Valar that originally came, each took on a role. All right, so let's kind of go over the individuals that came down. All right, the first out of the whole group that came down there was Manwë. Manwë is to this day known as the king of the world. He and the Morgoth are considered brothers in spirit, and Manwë was only slightly less powerful than Morgoth, but Manwë has ever been loyal in his desire to uplift and to rejoice in Iluvatar. He has never waned from his loyalty to Eru. All right, so Manwë came, and Aule came, and Ulmo came. They were the original ones who came down there. All right, so let's talk about them a little bit. So now to water. When they all came down and they started creating things, and eventually started to rain and the water was created. Now to water had that Ainur whom the elves call Ulmo turned to his thoughts. And of all, most deeply was he instructed by Iluvatar in music. So the Vala of water of the oceans is Ulmo, and he was taught most about music from Iluvatar. himself. And it is known amongst the elves that those who peer upon the sea at certain times in their lives, they will hear the music, and it will forever stay with them until eventually we are willing to leave and go to Valinor. But it is something that we cannot turn away from in due time. It's different for everyone. All right. So, but of the airs and the winds, Manwe was most pondered, who is the noblest of the Ainur. And of the fabric of the earth had Aule thought. So Aule is the blacksmith, the one who works with rock and metal and so forth. He was the one who could build up the mountains, while Urmo worked with the seas and Manwe worked with the skies and so forth. In the next chapter, the next edition of this, we'll be talking about the ValaQuenta, which is the history of the Valar. We will talk about each and every one of them in a unique way, and they're really quite amazing stories to learn about them in more detail. Okay, so they were down here, they were starting to work with it and to help create the vision. All right, but while they were there, again, the Morgoth was always present, and he was always getting in there and messing with things and always altering them. When Aule would raise a mountain, the Morgoth would tear it down. When Urmo would create an ocean, Morgoth would come in and fill it up. And he was constantly getting in there and altering the original concepts or perceptions, because in the end, he wanted to own the world. He wanted to be the lord of the world. Whereas Manwe is considered the king of the world, he is but a servant of Ilúvatar. And so whatever Manwe does in this world is always through the discussion or through the inspiration from Ilúvatar. Whereas the Morgoth wanted to be the king of the world and to be the lord of the world, and for him to make the decisions outside of the harmony of Ilúvatar. Well, obviously that wasn't going to work very well, and so they were constantly fighting with him, and it appeared for a while that the original designs of the world would never come to fruition. And truly to this day, those designs never did completely come to the original concept of music. That's why this is called Arda Mard. In other words, this is damaged. But there is a prophecy, and there is a hope that we know in the future. One day, this world will become Arda healed, and we will all have a part of that. Again, if you want to go back to one of my old videos, you'll see the one about Elven prophecy, where it talks about our role one day in the future, where we will all be a part of helping to heal this world, to where the music will then be set right, and then we'll be experiencing the world as it was truly meant to be. But we can and will be a part of that if you choose to grow and be a part of it, of course. All right, so they were fighting back and forth with this, and it looked like the Morgoth had the mastery. He was beginning to win the battle. All right, because Manwe does not understand evil. He cannot perceive it. All right, he is so close to Ilúvatar that he cannot perceive it. And so what they did was they called to the other Ainur beyond the world and said, those that would like to come help, please come help. And so many of them did. And amongst them was Tulkas. Tulkas is a wonderful Vala. He loves to fight. He laughs in battle. And he heard, as it says in there, that there was trouble in the little kingdom. And so he came down to help fight. And that became the first battle ever in the universe, against the Valar, against the Morgoth. And they won. And he left for a time and went off into the void because he could not accomplish what he wanted here, which gave the Valar time to then set things as right as they could. All right. So the world began to slowly take shape, and what we originally wanted to see happen would happen. So, and so it goes, and the Valar drew unto them many companions, some less, some well nigh as great as themselves, and they labored together in the ordering of the earth and in the curbing of the tumults. And then the Morgoth saw what was done, and that the Valar walked on the earth as powers visible, clad in the raiment of the world, and were lovely and glorious to see, and blissful, and that the earth was becoming as a garden for their delight, for its turmoils were subdued. His envy grew then the greater within him, and he also took visible form. But because of the mood and the malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible. All right. Remember what I mentioned in the last video, that what light is in us, we will manifest. So if we are dark, we will manifest darkness. If we are light, we will manifest light. And so the Valar, when they had made such progress with the garden, and they decided to clothe themselves in the raiment of the world, they were beautiful and glorious to see. They were kings and queens, but beyond anything even the elves would imagine. But when Morgoth tried to manifest himself, it was a dark and terrible Dark Lord, because that was his nature, and that's what manifested for him as well. All right, so that ended up being the first battle. They won, they kicked him out. Okay, and it goes on to say at the last paragraph of the Ainur, yet it is told, okay, let me back up there just to make sure. All right. Thus began the first battle of the Valar with Morgoth for the dominion of Arda, and of those two amounts the elves know but little, because again, whereas our knowledge was given to us from Eärioil, who learned from Pengolad of Gondolin, the original wars and battles for Arda was even long before we existed, and so they only know those stories from the Valar who told them, and the Valar have not told the elves everything. For what has here been declared is come from the Valar themselves, with whom the Elderlier, the elven people, spoke in the land of Elnor, and by whom they were instructed. But little would the Valar ever tell them of the wars before the coming of the elves. They just never told them all that much. Yet it is told among the Eldar, that would be us again, that the Valar endeavored ever, in spite of Morgoth, to rule the earth and to prepare it for the coming of the firstborn. And they built lands, and Morgoth destroyed them. Valleys they delved, and Morgoth raised them up. Mountains they carved, and Morgoth threw them down. Seas they hollowed, and Morgoth spilled them. And naught might have peace or come to lasting growth. For as surely as the Valar began a labor, so would Morgoth undo it or corrupt it. And yet their labor was not in vain, and though nowhere and in no work was their will and purpose wholly fulfilled, and all things were in hue and shape other than the Valar had at first intended, slowly, nonetheless, the earth was fashioned and made firm, and thus was the habitation of the children of Iluvatar established at the last in the deeps of time and amidst the innumerable stars. So they fought for us. They created the world and got it ready for us. It is said that 99% of the Earth's history, we have not existed. We've only been here about 1% of the Earth's history. So we can only imagine how much time occurred during this period of them creating the world and bringing it to fruition. An interesting thing I wanted to make a comment on was, again, let's go back to music, and this is an actual scientific fact that we know that the magic of Elven magic is art. Music is a part of art, and so we are in a great creation of art, all right? But about the music, all right, that music that they originally sang, the great music, went out into the void. Went out into the void. Well, I may have mentioned this in a previous video. Some of you out there are probably very familiar, I don't mean the sitcom, but are aware of the Big Bang Theory, how the universe came to being. Very similar, you might say, to Iluvatar going, Ea, and the universe was created. We can look at the same thing. But there was a scientific fact that came out of this in validation for what is mentioned in the Silmarillion. Here's a scientific validation for it. In the 1960s, two Bell telephone engineers were assigned to go figure out what was going on. Why was there a lot of static on their phone lines? And they never could figure out what this static came from. Well, what was going on? So these two engineers were tasked, you go out and you figure out what this noise is and fix it. Right? So the two engineers went out, and through their research they found out it wasn't terrestrial. meaning it wasn't on Earth, because every time they would aim their antennas upward, that's where the noise was the loudest. And so it began this big project, and they started researching it further. Then they started working with astronomers and with other physicists, and they found out that the static that they'd been hearing on the phone systems for years wasn't from Earth. It was from out in space. The astronomers got together to try to figure out what this noise was, and they figured it out. It's part of the hydrogen cycle. It's the noise made from hydrogen, the hydrogen atom, okay? And it was the original boom, the original noise from the Big Bang that still, in a very, very low level, still permeates the universe. Okay, it was the original boom, can still be heard as static over the phone lines. And it comes from the hydrogen atom. All right, one of the things that Urmo fell in love with was water. And it is also stated in the Silmarillion that in water still resides the greatest amount or sound of the original music, that water still holds. Water holds the most of the original sound, water itself. Well, what is water? H2O, hydrogen. So water holds it because hydrogen holds it, because it's the original music of Ilúvatar and the Ainur. Pretty cool when you think about it. All right? Okay, so that's it for the Ainur Lindari. It's my favorite one. It shows that we all live in a creation of art. What a better existence, what a better universe than we live in art. We are an art project in the process of still to this day being created, and the Valar still create to this day. All right, so I'm going to take just in a moment here, I'm going to end this video with a tiny clip of the ending of the Ainur Lindari video from Willow Productions that we're talking about. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get to go look at the video. Please let me know what you thought about this. This is an experiment on my part to see how everyone would like for me to continue to do this chapter by chapter. All right, please let me know. It was a joy working with all of you again. I'll go ahead and do the clip here in a moment. And all of you have a most blessed and rest of the day. All right, Namari.
So began their great labors in wastes unmeasured, until in the deeps of time there came to be that hour and that place, the habitation of the children of Ilúvatar.